Hello and welcome to this chess game review in which I cover a subject on endgames. So, how important are endgames in chess? So, let's find out here. I played a local club game recently, and I'm going to go over that game, and it goes deep into the end game, and we'll just see how it turned out here. So, let's see what we can learn. All right, so I had the white pieces and I was playing against Ian with black, and I played e4. He responded with c6, the Caro-Kann defense. So many times when they play c6, a lot of players will just push d4 and try and take control of the center with the pawns here in the middle. But I wanted to play a little differently. I'm trying to learn this alternate version where you bring the knights up. I believe it's called the two knights variation here. So they just continue with d5. The reason they played c6 was to push their d pawn. So now we bring this knight up. So this is the Caro-Kann defense, two knights attack. So now as we see, the computer does not recommend pushing this pawn forward and attacking the knight. Maybe that pawn would become weaker by pushing forward here. The knight would just move here and attack it. And then what do? I guess you could, well, you couldn't even push this e pawn right away because the knight could capture that. But let's see if we could take a look at it here. So d4, if they play that, now it looks like after knight to e2, and already the computer says this is an inaccuracy. So now you just attack the pawn, and then what do they do next? I mean, what if they pushed forward here? Well, then you could just capture the central pawn with your flank pawn here, which would be a favorable exchange. The computer recommends c5, but already white would be ahead here. So you do not want to, if we go back here, you don't want to push that pawn. So my opponent played correctly. Let's see here. The top recommended move is just an immediate knight to f6, although here maybe you could push forward and chase that knight and then push this pawn and gain space in the center. The next recommended move is just e6 to help fortify this pawn in the center. And my opponent instead opens things up a little bit. He captures in the middle. So then, of course, we recapture. And then he immediately attacks with knight to f6. So these are all book moves. So here it says the best move is either d3 or capturing on f6. And here in my opening repertoire, I guess I was supposed to move queen to e2. That way, if he captures, my queen develops to the center here. So instead of that, it looks like I couldn't remember what I should have done in my opening book, but I just decided to capture, and that at least doubles his pawns here. So it looks like it's better, instead of capturing with the g pawn towards the center, which would create an isolated pawn that could be weak over here on the h file, and black may want a castle, and he might not want an opening here. So it looks like capturing with the e pawn is better because it opens up a central file for your rook. It kind of pulls this pawn over here to help defend the king side, and it prevents you from breaking your pawns apart and leaving you with that isolated h pawn. So now I played d4 here, I believe, and so the computer said that's the best move, and it's a book move still. So my opponent responds with bishop to d6, aiming at my king side and getting ready to castle. So I do the same. I develop my bishop, and then I'm ready to castle. So he castles, I go ahead and castle. And then here He plays, looks like, well, let's go back and look at that. The computer says the best move is rook to e8 here, but looks like the second best move is to pin the knight. So looks like the computer says that is best now. So if we take a look at that move, instead of the rook moving to e8, if the bishop pinned our knight, what do we do here? Well, the computer recommends ignoring it, developing your rook. They would develop fighting for control of this e-file, and then it's recommended you just capture. They capture with their queen, of course, and now looks like just developing to e3 the computer recommends, or this h3 move. But now once this move is made, now the computer's recommending that you just develop your bishop here. So if we look at this earlier recommendation by the computer, h3, the bishop would just retreat and keep this pin on the knight against the queen. So now you would just continue to attack and push that bishop away up to g6. And here, what do? Well, you could exchange. You could maybe attack with your knight here, but then they would probably just capture here anyway, and then you recapture with your queen. But you get the idea. So back to the game. After we both castled and my opponent plays rook to e8, trying to take control of the e-file, I block the e-file here, but the computer says that that's an inaccuracy. That better would have been, let's see, h3 to prevent this pin on the knight against the queen. So after that, the computer recommends, well, now it's saying knight to d7. Earlier when I pulled this up, it recommended knight to a6. And now it's saying that's the best move. I mean, why would you do that? I guess you're threatening to move down here and attack the bishop. White could also, possibly just give up the bishop pair, capturing that knight and wrecking the pawns here on the queen side, causing long-term weaknesses. So you already have a pawn majority here on the queen side, which is an endgame advantage. So that's one thing to know when it comes to endgames, that your play in the opening and middle game, if you're more familiar with your endgames and what endgames your openings and middle games will lead to, you'll better be able to steer the game towards an endgame that's favorable for you. So here, you could possibly give up your bishop pair and wreck these pawns, and then that could help you in the endgame. But it's at the cost of giving up your bishop pair, and this is your good bishop on the light squares, compared to this bad bishop, which is blocked in by this d pawn, which is on the dark squares. So that's something that you would just have to factor in. Here it says not to give up your bishop pair, that just c3 would be best. All right, so in the game, we just developed our bishop, and now my opponent plays the best move. Well, now the computer's saying bishop to e6 is the best move. So I guess the computer changes its mind here. If we go back, it had said knight to d7 was good, but now it likes bishop to e6 better. But my opponent plays knight to d7, and here I played c3, and it looks like I should have played c4 here, with the idea, one, of gaining more space, but two, I could possibly push my unopposed pawn in this pawn majority in the end game, which is a good strategy. So here we have 4 pawns versus 3, and in the end game you want to push this unopposed pawn and try and break through. So if you push that and they capture, then you're going to push this unopposed pawn. Hopefully if there's a even trade, you don't want to just push this pawn and give it up. But let's say you push forward, they capture, and you recapture later in the game, then you'll have this unopposed pawn. So that's a little endgame strategy to remember, is if you have a pawn majority, usually you want to push that unopposed pawn and try and crash through and get a passed pawn. All right, so in the game we played safe here. We just played c3 to fortify this d pawn, and now my opponent retreats up here to cover this h pawn because we possibly have an attack, queen to c2, lining up on that. Now the knight is protecting. From here the knight could jump to g6 and maybe try and jump into the king side and aid in an attack over here later in the game. So now we have queen to c2, and the computer does not like that. That's an inaccuracy. And now the game has jumped in black's favor by 0.65 here. So if we would have played h3, the game would be about even. So it looks like that is what we should have played instead. h3 to prevent, to limit the scope of this bishop, to prevent this bishop from pinning our knight. And let's see here. Now the computer recommends bishop to e6 just to get this bishop developed. You keep an eye on this square. You could possibly, at some point move to d5 and aim at the king side on this diagonal. But you're also aiming at this pawn. Maybe the queen jumps here and you have a possible bishop sacrifice with a queen and bishop battery trying to break open the king side, and then possibly threaten a mate here with the bishop and the queen if this knight were not here to protect things. So anyway, it's looking kind of dangerous for white here with both of these bishops lined up. The queen can choose how it wants to join in this attack. So anyway, that's how the game could have gone if we played h3. But instead we played queen to c2 here, just creating a battery aimed at the king side. And so now, what does my opponent do? Well, of course they play bishop to g4, threatening to capture and break apart these pawns in front of my king and cause some problems here on the king side. So now the computer says this is an inaccuracy and that better than this move, although here the game would be about even, but even better would have been queen to a5. Also, with this move, black would have kept an advantage, a 0.65 advantage. So if the queen jumps down here, it gives the queen a lot more scope. It could move over here if possible. If needed, the queen could jump over here to the king side quickly and aid in some type of attack. Maybe the bishop comes down here, threatens to knock out the knight, and then the queen could position over here and threaten a mate on h2, something to that effect. And the queen keeps an eye on the queen side as well. But mostly the queen can reposition from a5 over here to the king side and help in an attack. Let's see. Now, if this occurred, queen to a5, the computer recommends this move. Now, this is what it recommended earlier, so I guess the computer changed its mind here, because now it's saying this would be a mistake, and that's what it looked like to me. That didn't look like the best move here. So I don't know why the computer recommended that earlier. Let's see here. Now after queen to a5, it's recommending Another move that looks crazy. Knight to h4. And, why would you play that move? I guess it helps control this f5 square. Now it just recommends queen to h5 here. I don't know. This doesn't look like the greatest strategy, putting that knight on the edge, although it says that's best here. So after this, we have what? G3. I don't know. This looks really dangerous. I don't know. I mean, the computer sometimes recommends crazy lines that the average person would not think about playing. Here, I guess you just go here. If they attack with the pawn, I guess you could retreat back. Now it's saying bishop to h3. I don't know. This just looks like a crazy attack. So let's go back to the game here. Well, before I do, after queen to a5, now it's saying h3, which is probably what I would recommend. You just play h3 and prevent a pin by this bishop. So back to the game. We do get pinned here. So I didn't really want to move my queen back over here to cover the bishop. Although maybe that's possible. The third recommended move is queen to d1 to cover this. But it says the best move is this, which is what I played in the game. Knight to d2. And now my opponent plays queen to c7. Or actually d7. So it looks like the computer recommended either queen to c7, attacking here, or let's see, if we go back. All right, so it looks like that's the most recommended move, is just jumping here, queen to c7. So we'll take a look at that. Queen to c7, lining up on this pawn, but we would just play h3, attacking, and then they would retreat like this. And now, let's see, now we just develop our rook from A to E1, or from F to E1, or even jump up here with knight to C4 to attack the bishop. Okay, once again, back to the game. Our knight retreats because it was under attack by the bishop. My opponent brings the queen up to D7, and now we have knight to E4, jumping up here, attacking the bishop. So it looks like here the best move is to ignore that attack and just play rook to E7, preparing to double rooks up on the E file. So instead, my opponent retreats to keep his bishop pair, which still seems like a good plan. And now also the computer's recommending that we should have moved rook at A to D8 over here. But my opponent retreats the bishop, keeping his bishop pair. So now, let's see here. It looks like the best move is to take our rook, which is doing nothing over here on the A1 square, and then we should have moved that over to E1. Or the second best move is to push up this F pawn to prevent a possible queen and bishop battery threatening a mate down here on H2. But in the game, let's see, what did we do? We retreated back, and the computer says that's an inaccuracy, because now this knight is just in a defensive position, and it was better posted here in the center of the board. So it looks like H5 is preferred by the computer. Another interesting move. I mean, I guess we could look at this H5 move. So if h5 was played, computer recommends ignoring that and just playing our rook over here to e1 once again. And I was thinking, well, if we played this move, h3, I don't know, that might make the opponent want to, well, let's see here if they have a bishop sacrifice. Yes, now it says this would be a blunder, that they should attack like this. And then the best move is not to capture, although that's the second best move, because now it recommends this. And then white is just under a heavy attack here. It looks like not even capturing, because if we capture there, well, then what do? They could capture over here, and then we're in all kinds of trouble. So during the game, I was kind of watching for possible attacks or sacrifices over here, because whenever they have two bishops lined up on your king side, you have to really be careful. So in the game, after my knight moves here, they just bring their rook to the center, which is still a good move. And then we play this, giving up our bishop pair. But the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that better would have been bringing our rook to the center. And then they recommend this move, getting ready to double rooks up here possibly. And now the computer is saying to push this pawn forward because we can't capture, or they would capture our bishop here. So back to the game. We exchange bishops here. Now, I make a mistake that my opponent didn't catch here. I just go ahead and capture with the queen. And so this is a mistake. We can see why here. Well, first of all, we'll see what I should have done. Instead, I should have captured with the knight instead. And then the game could have progressed with g6, chasing the knight. We retreat back to the edge before repositioning here towards the center. And now the game may have continued with something like this. We probably would not want to capture that, or they could push forward and try and block our bishop in maybe. So now the king moves up here to protect this pawn. And so this is how the game may have continued. It goes on a little further here. We capture, they capture. But anyway, something like this. And now in the game, we'll see why this was a mistake, capturing with the queen. So if we go back a little bit here, I bring my bishop up, attacking their queen and their bishop at the same time. So they capture, which the computer says is a great move, because now I make this mistake. And we'll see why this is a mistake. So my opponent just captured with the queen, but there was a better option, which was a little tricky here. Capturing first with the bishop, and then my queen would be unprotected and forced to capture their queen. But now, before recapturing, I would capture this pawn with check, or my opponent would capture the pawn with check, and then I would have to recapture. And so in this position, black would be ahead here. So if we look at the pawns, it's 7 pawns to 6, so he would be up a pawn. And then of course he would capture my queen here, and then maybe I would go here. But let's see here, he could possibly double rooks and get ready to exchange off material. Because he has that extra pawn, so he could try and push these pawns over here. The only advantage I have is this pawn majority on the queen side. So in endgames, it's really important to study your endgames and learn about pawn majorities and how you want to try in the end game to push your pawn majority and get a passed pawn that you can use to your advantage in the end game, which we'll see later in this game. All right, so there's a lot to study in this game, so let me get back to this. I capture. He makes the miss here of capturing with the queen. Now black is ahead, but just barely, so the game is about even now. So the best move, of course, is to recapture. And now they start chasing my knight, although the computer recommends just attacking with the rook over here. But now, let's see, the best place to put my knight, and I remember in this position, I was trying to think for a little while what I should do with this knight. Do I jump up here and check? But then the king could come down and attack me, although I'd be protected by the bishop. But if I'm under attack, where do I go? I go here. They could attack me again, and then I don't know. I was just kind of really trying to figure out where I should put this knight. The computer recommends knight to h4, so we could take a look at that. Knight to h4. And then instead of attacking here and letting the knight jump up into this square on f5, it looks like the best thing is either, to ignore the knight and play knight to e6, or play f5 here. Because if you play f5 and if you play f5, you could have a possibility of just pushing forward here and chasing this bishop away, and then the other g pawn could move forward. The pawns would just start marching forward, so that could be an issue. But in the game, they recommend knight to e6, and then we play g3 to limit the scope of this bishop here on c7. All right, anyway, let's get back to this. In the game, I just jumped down here to g3, so I'm kind of playing defense. Although, this bishop can't do too much. The king is covering this h2 pawn. The king moves forward, although the computer recommends marching this h pawn up to h5. So now we centralize the rook. They start pushing their pawn, threatening a fork here. So even in slow end games, you always have to watch out for tactics, because end game might look boring, but if you're not careful, they could sneak in a tactic and cause problems. So here's a simple tactic that they're threatening, just pushing this pawn forward and forking my bishop and knight. So we have to do something about that. So we play bishop to c1, although the computer recommends knight to e2 as being the best move, because if they push forward with that pawn, well then of course you could capture with the knight. So instead of that, I retreated my bishop, and now they're saying that's the best move, bishop to c1. So I guess the computer sometimes is a little indecisive on what the best move is. So they play f4, attacking my knight, and so now this is a problem. There's only one good move here, and it's knight to h1. So my knight is just placed on probably the worst square ever. I can't move anywhere else. I can't go here, or the rook would capture me. I can't go to e4, or the rook would capture me. So the only option is rook to h1. And my opponent remarked that he doesn't think he's ever seen a knight end up on h1 in any of his games ever. So I don't know, that was pretty crazy how this knight ended up all the way on h1. So let's see what happens next here. My opponent decides to improve his knight, which is a good plan. So if we look at things, I have a passive bishop on the back rank. His bishop is better. He has a better knight. His rook is controlling the e-file somewhat, although the knight is blocking it. So because that knight is blocking it, I decide to fight for control of the e-file now, which looks like that was the best move. And at this point, black has the advantage by 0.39. So he plays this move, which I was expecting in the game. I was thinking, well, if he did that, do I want to push forward here and have this pawn just lodged into my position here? I didn't really like that. So I played the best move, just capturing this pawn, even though it wrecked my kingside pawns. So let's go back. The computer says that f3 is an inaccuracy. That even better would have been just to play g5 here and fortify this pawn. And then it looks like I should play f3. And then what do we have after that? King to f6 is recommended, or even f6, just fortifying these pawns. But now my knight can jump up here and maybe jump here, or even over here to d3. So this position would at least let me get my knight out. But in the game, we had this f3 move. So my knight will still be able to get out, but now I have these wrecked pawns. It looks like this is the best move, and now the game is slightly in white's favor because we got that pawn, an extra pawn. So what do we have? 7 pawns versus 6. So we're ahead 1 pawn, but we have a wrecked kingside pawn structure, which is a long-term endgame weakness. Our long-term endgame advantage is the pawn majority here, that we can try and push through one of these pawns and create a passed pawn in the endgame. So we're fighting for control of the e-file here. So my opponent decides to play knight to f4, and the computer says that's an inaccuracy that jumps the game up even more in white's favor. So what should my opponent have done? Well, it looks like maybe rook to e7. It's showing that as best. Getting ready to double the rooks on the e-file and fight for this e-file. So the best response, it looks like, is g3 to get this horrible knight activated, or bishop to e3 blocking the e-file. And now the game could continue with doubling instead over on this d-file. Because the knight is blocking the rooks from moving all the way up, or basically the knight is limiting limiting the scope of our rook. And because of that, it looks like the computer says the best thing to do would be to double up here and keep an eye on this unopposed pawn here so we can't push forward. So how might the game continue? Well, it looks like the computer recommends rook to e4, although I don't know how much I like that, because the knight could just jump in here and attack us on e4 and threaten this pawn. So I don't know, that could be an issue. What else does it recommend? Knight to e2 to help cover this square. So anyway, in the game, after capturing and breaking my pawns apart, my opponent jumps his knight down, and maybe even threatens to attack here and attack this pawn. But anyway, I don't want that knight down here in my position. Another issue could be if he captures, I capture, then he forks my rook and bishop here, capturing then I would have to capture, and then he could move his rook to the e file and maybe cause problems that way. So let's see. It looks like the best move is to get rid of that knight with our bishop, which is what we did. And so this keeps white ahead in the game at this point. And black responds by recapturing, although it says that the computer recommends capturing the rook first. So now we jump our knight up here, and the computer says a better move would be to attack with the rook, which is interesting. We could take a look at that, because if we do that, we're threatening to attack or capture the bishop. So if the bishop retreats, well, then we could double our rooks up here. And that could give us a slight advantage, although I don't know, the king could just move over and we would just end up exchanging rooks off. If they capture, it gets rid of our doubled pawn, and that would help us out. So in the game, instead we played knight to g3, which it says is still an excellent move. And now we have f5, pushing forward, getting ready to maybe retreat back and then attack our knight possibly, but giving the king some room, gaining space here on the king side. So now it looks like knight to e2 would be the best move, and looks like that's what we played. So, and once again here, capturing the rook and exchanging off one of the rooks, that's what's recommended by the computer. So I don't know, do we want to take a quick look at that? If they captured, then we're forced to capture, of course. And now it looks like just retreating to d6 is recommended to keep our rook from being able to jump up here to the 7th rank and harass these pawns. And then we would just jump our knight forward. All right, so back to the game. f5 is pushed forward. We retreat our knight to attack their bishop. The bishop retreats back. The computer says it should have retreated all the way back to h6. But he probably wanted to leave room to be able to push this h-pawn possibly. Or he wanted to be able to reposition his bishop to f6. Maybe keep an eye on all these pawns which are on the same colored squares as the bishop. So another endgame strategy that you should learn is if your opponent has pawns, or excuse me, has a dark squared bishop and your pawns are on the same color as the colored squares of that bishop, these could become weak or targets by that bishop. So one good strategy is to put all my pawns on the light squares so that they can't be attacked by this bishop. But also, there's kind of a balance. By keeping some of these pawns on the dark squares, it limits the scope of the bishop. So you kind of have to figure that out in each game, what is best, whether you want to move all your pawns to the opposite colored squares, or if you need to keep some of your pawns on the same squares as the bishop to prevent the bishop from being able to go there. And we'll see why that could be important later in this game as well. All right, so our knight retreats back here, which I did that to reposition up to d3 and then try and reach this outpost on e5. But it looks like computer recommends king to f1, although knight to c1 is the second best move. So now, once again, capturing the rook is recommended here. But in the game, the king moves over to f7, and the computer says that is a mistake. So we'll have to see why that's a mistake. Instead, the computer recommends capture, then we capture, then c5, which is interesting. And also, now the computer's saying bishop to d2 would be good as well. But c5, then if we capture, well, now we have, let's see, rook to d2 attacking this pawn, which would be a great move. And then, b4. And after this, we can't capture this pawn, of course, because the knight is protecting that pawn. But we have these doubled pawns. I don't know. These still could be strong because it's 4 pawns versus 2, even though these are doubled. This could become a target, and it looks like bishop to f6 is one of the best moves, targeting that. So what do we do next here? We can't move our rook because then there's a possible fork here of the knight and our king. So it looks like knight to b3 or even c4, which, I don't know, I guess we could take a look at that c4 move. But now it's saying this knight move is even better because, if we just move up, attack that pawn, then what do? You can't really protect it. So king to f1 would be best. So if we go back, instead of that pawn push, knight to b3, it likes that move a lot better. So that would allow capture of the pawn. But now, let's see. Now we have rook to c1. And this would also line our rook up behind this pawn, the c pawn up here, which could try and push forward in the future. Now, this move, and then knight to a5 attacking up here. So then you would have this, and instead of capturing, well, now it doesn't like that move. Now it says just bishop to f4 would be better. But if we went to this, they attack. Interesting. It looks like just moving here and attacking first would be even better. So if we do that, then what? Bishop to f4. Now it says to ignore everything and push this pawn up here. So here's another crazy endgame tactic to remember. Now this pawn, the bishop can't capture your rook, or this pawn will just start marching up. So it looks like b5 attacking the knight, and now rook to d1, getting ready to move up here, attack the king, and then push this pawn. So capture, and instead of rook to d7 check, now it says rook to d4 is even better. Bishop to b8, rook takes c4, bishop to c7, rook to d4, threatening that attack, the fork here on d7, bishop to e5 attacking, and now it recommends just ignoring this. Now what if you played this? Oh, I guess either way works. You go there, they're forced to capture to stop the queen, and then we have a check, and we pick that bishop off, and we're guarding our base pawn here, and we're going to try and help a pawn move up here, have another passed pawn. So that's another strategy that you have to watch out for in the end game, those passed pawns and all the different ways that you can try and break through with your passed pawn and try and promote to a queen for the win. All right, back to the game. Let's see, we'll go back a little bit here. So we attack their bishop. My opponent retreats. We retreat here to reposition up to d3. They move their king over, and that's a mistake. But we moved our king over, and we were not able to really take advantage of their mistake. This was a miss by moving our king. Instead, we should have played rook captures on e8. Or now the computer's saying knight to d3 is even better. Let's look at the rook, look at the rook captures. So if we captured, they would capture, then knight to d3, and we get ready to jump our knight up to this outpost. I see why it might have been better, because now, there's the option of them jumping here, maybe, and targeting this b pawn. I don't know if I like that, but it says bishop to d8 is best. All right. Well, let's go back and look at the knight to d3 move. So it says this move is better, and I see why this is the best move now. It's better to get that knight up into the game, and looks like bishop to h6, or once again capturing us, then we capture, and now king to f6. All right. King to g2. Bishop to h6. Rook to e2. a5. Anyway, so on. I'm not going to dig crazy deep into this. So the computer says that was a mistake here. We didn't take advantage of it. We just moved our king over, and my opponent has another miss here, attacking this pawn. So better would have been what? Once again, to attack the rook. So rook captures, or excuse me, what is it doing here? So instead of this move, better would have been this move, capturing our rook. Then we would capture with the king, which, I don't know, it seems like it would be better to capture with the rook, and now it is saying that would be best. Because here they could capture, we capture, king comes up, I don't know. Anyway, this is a line that the computer gave. So this was a miss here. It looks like best would have been to exchange a pair of rooks here. So now we respond with a miss. It says the best move would have been to jump our knight up immediately, and but I don't know if I like that, because if we do that, knight to d3, what if, oh, I see, well, okay. They don't want to capture that pawn because we could push forward and maybe trap them. Let's see. If they go there, well, then we just play f4, trapping that bishop in. But they could attack here, and now we just capture that pawn. Their bishop is able to escape, but we could play f4 immediately, although, I don't know, that could give an outpost for the rook here possibly, but I don't know, I kind of like that f4 move. Although these pawns would be on the dark squares and the bishop could attack. So it's saying b4 is the best move here. and then rook to e4. But because we hadn't moved that pawn, we could play f3 and chase a rook away if it lands on e4. All right, so back to the game. I pushed to h3 to get my pawn off of the dark square so the bishop can't harass it anymore. My opponent moves up here to f6. Computer says that's an inaccuracy. Once again, it likes the capture of the rook. We would capture, they capture here, we capture. Now it recommends this move or pushing this pawn. But I guess they could also maybe try and control the e-file. Let's see, f4, attacking here. Now if we capture, they can move in here and try and harass our pawns. Our rook might be stuck playing defense. All right, so, and that's another very important point in the endgame. You want active rooks and not passive rooks, because if your king is stuck, or sorry, if your rook is stuck playing defense, you could definitely have some problems. All right, let's move on here before this video turns into a 3-hour saga. All right, the king moved up. Our knight finally jumps up here. Now they retreat back because we were attacking the bishop with our knight. So f4 is played, and the computer says that is an inaccuracy, that rook to e3 would have been better. So my idea behind this was to be able to jump my knight up here, and if the bishop captured, I would be able to recapture and undouble my pawns. But it looks like better would have been rook to e3, trying to create active rooks by doubling them on this open e-file. So it looks like this should be played to get ready to double and counter. And then now, well, this is interesting. Now it recommends king to e2 of all moves. I mean, I guess that would help activate your king, which the kings are very important in endgames, because especially as there are more and more a limited number of pieces, you definitely want to involve your king in the endgame. So the best move here is to double up, or it's saying a5 as well. So now, what do we do? f4. Okay. Then g5 attacking. Then we would capture. The king would capture. Now rook to g1 check. And they do not recommend moving down to here. You think they would be able to target this, but king back up to f6 is recommended. All right, anyway, that is another option of how the game could have gone. So in the game, we had h6, another inaccuracy. So better would have been rook to e4, immediately putting pressure on this pawn. So let's see, I guess we should take a look at that, because rook to e4 could have caused some problems. The knight is the only thing protecting, and you have two pieces that could have attacked there. So we have f3 attacking the rook. Now the rook exchanges off here. We capture. They play b5 and king up to f2. But it looks like white would still have the advantage here. All right, so back to the game. After I play f4, they played that inaccuracy of pushing this pawn, which is preparing to push the g pawn and try and start marching their pawns forward here and gain space. Okay, so now knight to e5 is played, but king to g2, it looks like that would have been better. So now they push forward. That's the best move. White is still ahead here. And a4, gaining space on the queen side, is our best option. But that or king to e2, which looks kind of crazy. King to g2. Instead, we captured. That was an inaccuracy. So king to g2 is what was recommended. I don't know. Here it says the computer should do this next and that the game would progress like this. And then this move. But I don't know about that. If we go back, if we play king to g2, what if they just capture immediately here? Well, now it says king to f3 is best. And what if next, can they capture with their bishop? Oh no, because if they capture and we capture with the pawn, they can't take that pawn back, because if the rook captures, oh, maybe they can. Let's take a look at it. If we go there, it's not as good to capture that way. So this is another little tricky exchange here. It's better to capture this way, and now to just keep the rooks. All right, well, if they play rook to e7, now shouldn't we just capture that? Okay. Then rook to d5. Anyway, that's a little option that I wanted to take a look at. So in the game, we had f takes g5. They recaptured. And now king to g2 is best here. But we played f4 to break their pawns up here, which wasn't the best move. Better would have been king to g2, rook to e7, retreat back, something like this. Now they're saying we should have retreated back the other way and attacked the bishop. But in the game, we played f4 here, trying to break these pawns up. And if they double, that's okay too, which is what happened in the game. And that's the best move. They capture. White is still ahead here, but not as much. So now we retreat back to block these. It looks like an immediate pawn push would have been better. So now they attack that pawn. That's an inaccuracy. Better would have been rook to e4 here. Maybe getting ready to double the rooks up. So now we have to push that pawn to keep it protected by the knight. And so we have the other rook taking control of the open file. Here we played king to f2, but rook to e2 would have been better. White is still ahead here. The bishop retreats, but even better would have been rook to g4. And now we make a mistake here. So this is what I was talking about. And let me turn on a light here because it's starting to get dark in here. So now d5 here. This was a mistake. And now the game has swung with advantage to black. Excuse me, by 0.55 in black's advantage after this mistake. So I pushed my unopposed pawn too early, because the bishop can now check my king and start harassing me. So, a big mistake here. Better would have been instead, looks like rook to e5 is the best move here. Just jumping the rook up, getting ready maybe to double pawns over here. Let's see what the computer recommends here. Attacking. Now we retreat back. The rook moves over. We capture, they capture. We move over here behind our passed pawn. And so remember that rooks usually belong behind passed pawns so they can help march them forward. And the further the passed pawn makes it up the board, the more of a threat it becomes. So here it recommends h8 to try and get in front of this pawn. And then c4, maybe to get ready to push and break through for another passed pawn over here. And now rook to h7. So I don't know, that's interesting. Why would this be important? Maybe to get ready to swing back over to this side if the rook moves over here and tries to cause any problems. So now knight to e1. So that's an interesting move. I guess that would let your king move up, and the knight and the king could try and attack here possibly. So b6, king to f3, rook to d7. Oh, now it doesn't like that king move, because now the knight has to go here to keep the rook from jumping down here and harassing your king. So, better would have been to bring that knight up quicker. All right, so back to the game. d5, my big mistake here in the end game. So my opponent just captures, and that was an inaccuracy, and now white has a slight advantage here. So better would have been, instead of that, to immediately check my king. So now this bishop is going to cause problems here. So the best move would be maybe king to f1, and now we have a capture there. Rook captures. Now the knight is under attack, so what does it do? It jumps up here to block the bishop. We have a capture. Now a check first. The king moves up. Check again. And now we capture and have a passed pawn over here. So they capture this passed pawn, but now we have, oh man, crazy, rook to e6 here. And it looks like a crazy endgame. Bishop to g5. Man, this looks dangerous for black, but then dangerous for white here as well. So it says we could go there even, but then you're going to have a check. King to h5. Check over here. King to g5. And not checking over here, but capturing. So we capture, forcing the king back to the edge here. And now, let's see. Rook to h6 is best? Well, that's interesting. I mean, why wouldn't they just move up here and attack? With something like this. Then you have to move here. Then behind the passed pawn, remember, rooks are very powerful behind passed pawns, whether they're yours or the opponent's. And why? Because when they get behind a passed pawn, well, one, if it's your pawn, it can really help to guide that pawn to promotion. So if this was a white rook back here behind the pawn, that pawn could just start marching up and black would have to block it. Now, behind this pawn, they can keep an eye on this pawn, although it looks like the king, at some point after the rook protects, the king could go over here and try and chase it. So what do we have here? Rook to g7. And what if we had something like this? Then looks like you would just take. Anyway, before I dig too crazy into all of that, so they captured, we captured, and now rook to d8. And here I was thinking for a while, and I wasn't sure what to do. I thought about either doubling up by moving this rook here, or even bringing the rook up to e5 and doubling up horizontally here. It looks like the best move would have been, looks like to double this way maybe. Rook at e to d1, or rook to b5 to go after the pawn. What else? Rook at e to e5 to go that way. But let's take a look at what it says is the best move, to go that way. And now it says that's a mistake. All right. So now it's saying that is a mistake and that the game would be about even after that. So let's take a look at the other option. Now it's saying rook at e to e5 is best. So let's see what it says after that move. Now it says that is an inaccuracy and the game would be even. So I guess the computer is not even sure what is best here. Rook at d to e5. All right, now it's saying that is best. So in the game, I remember thinking about that move, wondering if that was a decent move. We're targeting the bishop, and it looks like best would be just to guard the bishop with rook to d7. And not to check. Well, you can't check because the rook would just pick you off there. So rook to d7 says that is a great move. And now a4, just to gain space over here. So a4. And then after that, rook to h5, or even a3, c4, start pushing our unopposed pawn. Anyway, we could look at the top moves here. Now it's saying a3 would have been better. Maybe to get ready to push forward and limit the scope of that bishop. All right, so anyway, here retreating the bishop back is recommended. But now we have a threat of checking here. I don't know, this is starting to look a little dangerous for black. Let's say they go here, and then now it wants us to push up to a5. Okay. Well, I guess we can do that because the rook is here. Or even c4, push our unopposed pawn. But it says a5, just gaining space is the best move. And now rook to h5, guarding this pawn. King to g2 or c4 here. c4. Looks like they could, well, see, king to f7. They just move out of here. King to g2. All right, anyway, that's just going to go on and on. So it looks like I should have played the rook over to here. And not worried. Well, this would have stopped a check and would have left me with the doubled rooks. Yeah, okay, it looks like that's the move that I should have played. But in the game, let's see what actually happened. I captured here. They captured. And then c4. What is that? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, see, if I would have moved here, I would be protected. It says I should just bring the knight up here. All right, so in the game, I try to start pushing my unopposed pawn. They check me, causing problems here. So king to e2, but looks like I should have gone to f1. Now we have rook check. And what do I do here? The computer says to go back to f1, but I went the other way. I have to be careful not to go to d2, or they could attack me with a check on b4 and then pick off my rook. So now they play rook to e3, and it looks like that's an inaccuracy, putting the game back slightly in white's favor, but only if I capture their rook, which I did not do. So even better would have been rook to d8 here, check, which would keep the game in black's favor. Then it looks like I should go to e2, and then what? Rook to g8 is best. So now rook to g5 to block. That way the rook can't come down here and check me and then pick off my pawns over here. So it looks like that's the best move. But now they're going to go over here and attack this pawn. So I have to go back to f3. And then it recommends going back to g8. So it could have maybe ended in a draw by repetition there. But in the game, they play this. So now I moved here to protect the knight, and that's an inaccuracy, and now black is ahead. So instead, I should have captured, it looks like. So capture, then we would have a recapture. With the pawn is best to undouble your pawns. And now the king would have to jump up here to stop, although now it looks like it doesn't prefer that move. Now the computer is saying that knight to g5. I don't think the computer knows what to do here exactly. Let's look at this other one, knight to e1. Nope. It wants this move, knight to g5, and it still says that's best. Then we have bishop to e7, getting ready to attack over here. King to e2. F4, protecting. King to f3. But now it's saying not to do that. To just go here. Back to there. Oh, it doesn't like that either. Man, yeah, I think we would be in trouble in this variation if we didn't play this right. So that's the main reason I didn't want to undouble his pawns. So let's take a look at that. We're at least immediately attacking here. But then you have king to e5. Knight up to f3. Oh, but now they can't protect this pawn. But they can go after this one. Then we capture there. All right, so that's tricky stuff. All the more reason for the endgame, for you to study endgames and practice this stuff, because it can get really crazy. So we played rook to f1 to protect our knight in this position instead of capturing. But now black is ahead here. So they push this pawn forward, which is a good move, but recommended is retreating the bishop back and getting ready to target this pawn. So now I make a mistake. Moving my king up here, and it is 1.67, almost over 1.5 pawns worth of material in black's favor at this point, even though we're actually even in material, because it allows a check on e2 here. So what should I have done? It looks like h5 or a3 over here. So let's take a look. H5, does that do anything? Now, bishop to f8 to stop that pawn, maybe. Although it prefers us just moving here instead. All right, so let's take a look at that. Well, first we'll see what the computer originally recommended, something like this. Yeah, but I don't know. Your king is stuck on the edge down here guarding this pawn. Now your passed pawn is not protected anymore. I don't know. At some point they could try and retreat out, maybe go after it. But let's see. After h5, now it's saying better would be what? This move says that is best. And then king to d2, just moving up here, or a4. Okay, let's go back to the game. I played king to c2, and my opponent takes advantage of it, attacking my king. So I jump down here to be able to push this pawn and protect this one. They push forward. That's an inaccuracy. Better would have been to move their king over and maybe get ready to pile up with the king and the bishop on this pawn. So I push forward. That's an inaccuracy. But before we do that, let's look at what they recommended. King to g6. Knight jumping up here. Now they pile up here. We capture. Oh man, they attack. We move. They capture here. They pick that off. Oh man, yeah, I don't like this. Now it's saying black is, pretty far ahead here, probably winning with this passed pawn. And they're about to stop this, what's going on over here. So this doesn't look good at all. So black, could have taken advantage more over here. If we go back, once I move there, instead of going here, they should have maybe went after this pawn. So let's look at that. King to g6. Now it's saying knight to e1. All right. Well, I guess we go after the bishop that way. Go here to stop us from harassing the bishop. Then we go back up here. They go rook to e2. Now it wants us to play knight to e1 again. All right, anyway, back to the game. So they push the pawn forward. Now we play b3. That's an inaccuracy. Pushing our passed pawn would have been better. So if we push that pawn, then the king moves over here to help stop it. And then what? Then we see this knight to e1 move again. But even then, black is ahead here. So b3 was played. Now they exchange off. So that was the mistake. Trading. Once they trade the rooks off, the game is even. So instead, looks like rook to g2 or king to g6 would have been better. So now it's saying rook to g2 is best. So what do? Go here. They play rook to g4 to protect this pawn. And I thought, well, why wouldn't they just bring the bishop up here maybe? But they're attacking this as well. So now what do? We play h5. It doesn't like that. It's saying that's a bad move. So what would be best there? h5. It's saying knight to f3 is better. So just jumping up knight to f3. Then we would have king to g6. Wait a minute. King to g6. Now we just have a fork here. Why can't you do that? Fork, king to h5, capture. There, now we have a passed pawn. Rook takes f4, g3. Oh man, yeah, that looks really bad. f5, king. Oh, this is not good. Yeah. So rook to f1. That does not look good. King to g4. I mean, why wouldn't you go here? Oh, I guess they could check you there. All right. But this looks very dangerous, and the bishop is guarding the queening square there. So that doesn't look good at all. Anyway, in the game, we traded off. So what should they have done? It looks like rook to g2 would have kept the advantage with black, and quite a bit of an advantage. 1 3/4 worth of material. So, in the game, once they play this, I thought, all right, I can trade off, get rid of that troublesome rook. They capture, and now I need to activate my king. So they go after that pawn over there. I go after their pawns over here on f4. So they protect. I start pushing forward, and it looks like that was the only move I believe that worked here. So, and I thought about, should I play here to a4, but that would be a bad move there. So another reason to study the pawn moves and how to play the pawns in the end game, because it can be very tricky. We see if I would have played a4, well then his 2 pawns would be stopping my 3 pawns, and I wouldn't really have much to do. He could retreat up here. I could capture this pawn, but then what do I do? I would have to stop this other pawn while he marches over to attack my pawns. So in the game, I play a3, which allows me to keep pushing pawns forward. So one option I want to look at, my opponent just played king up to f6 here. So what if they would play something like this? Well, I guess I could just push forward. I could either take or play b4. So let's see if that makes a difference. If I just play that, now if they go here, I capture. If they go here, now what? King to g5 or just c5. Like c5 works. They would have to capture. I would capture. Then they go over to stop that. I have to capture that. They capture. And now we take the opposition. We have if they go there to go after our pawn, we keep the opposition. They go to b3. Once again, we grab the opposition, leaving 1 odd square in between us. And if they capture, well then we keep the opposition, and now they're kind of stuck here. So we have to go here to keep that king trapped. If they go up to a3, well, now we can go down here and control the queening square. So if they go, to a1, well, then we can keep the opposition diagonally. See if that works. looks more dangerous. King to c1. But if we look at this, now what if they did that? Oh, they can't guard their pawn because then we go here, and then we pick that pawn off. But anyway, so that's one way the game could have gone. But after a3 in the actual game, he retreats over here, heading towards the queen side. I pick this pawn off. He moves. I move this pawn up. He captures. I capture. He moves back here to keep an eye on this. And the game's a draw now. I push this. He capture. He has to go stop that pawn. And I capture and he captures, and we ended with a draw. So if I look at the game review, it looks like, let's see, I played at 87.5% accuracy versus their 87.7. So congratulations to my opponent. He played slightly more accurately than me. He had definitely two chances in the game that were pretty big. He was ahead by about 1.57 at one point, and then, let's see, 1.67 at another part of the game. So he had two chances there to try and push for a win, and it looks like I had a little bit of opportunity here in the middle of the game. I was ahead 1.34 at one point. So in the game, I had one great move. My opponent had two. I played 24 of the best moves. They played 23. I had three excellent moves, but they had 7. So 11 good moves to their 9. And then I had 8 book moves to their 7. So inaccuracies. We both had 9 inaccuracies. I had 3 mistakes and they had 2. I had 2 misses and they had 2 as well. So pretty close game there. Good job by my opponent, just holding that game. Basically, even when I had the advantage, he just held me off, and he had 2 chances that he could have pushed a little bit harder and he could have gotten a win there. But it was a long game. We didn't play with the clock, and it was about a 3-hour game. And this video is probably going on about 3 hours, so I better end it here. Thank you for watching. Even the computer says a nice even game here. I could take a look at what this... So this is where I made a mistake. If we go to the middle here, at this point, it looks like was where I had one of the biggest advantages. Well, not one of the biggest advantages. Let's see if we go a little bit further. Somewhere in here, I had an opportunity. All right, so right around here is where I had an advantage building, and then it kind of ended with, let's see, well, yeah, here the game just got crazy. It looks like I had an opportunity here to double rooks, and I didn't do that, so it looks like that move, rook at d to e5, was a better move. But anyway, if we go back to the review, we see that the game was pretty even. My opponent had an advantage, then I got an advantage, then he got the advantage, and then it went to equal into a draw. All right, well, thank you for watching, especially if you hung in there for this entire video. It just shows that how, especially if we go down to the end game here, this shows you how important end games are, and that you definitely need to study your end games, and it can help you, save a draw or get a win in the end. So this is what happened. All right. Once again, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments, suggestions, requests for material on future videos. Thanks for watching and have a super chess day.